Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's story. In this episode, we dive into the fragile balance between love and doubt. While Diep is carrying James's child, her heart is shaken by suspicion when James hires a new secretary. Believing he might be hiding an affair, Diep confronts James, and the three of them sit down together to clear the air. What begins as a painful misunderstanding soon turns into a lesson about trust, patience, and the strength of love. Make sure to watch the video until the very end. And don't forget to subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Your support means the world to us. The morning sun filters through thin curtains, spilling golden light across the modest farmhouse. Lytudiep moves slowly, one hand supporting her growing belly, while the other gently strokes the wooden table. Her pregnancy should have brought her nothing but peace, yet her mind is clouded with restless thoughts. James has been busier than usual. His company hired a new secretary not long ago, a young woman named Lynn. Every time Diep thinks of her, an uneasy knot forms in her chest. She pictures James in the office, his smile directed at someone else, his voice softening for reasons she doesn't understand. Though James still treats her tenderly, the shadow of suspicion creeps in. That morning, as she washes vegetables by the sink, Hockey the dog barks outside. A moment later, James steps in, adjusting the sleeves of his neatly pressed shirt. His smile warms the room instantly. "Diep, you've been working too hard again," he says, setting down a paper bag filled with fruit. Diep forces a smile. "I'm fine, just keeping busy." But James notices the flicker of unease in her eyes. He moves closer, brushing dirt from her hand. "You're carrying our baby now. Don't overdo it." She nods, but her thoughts wander back to Lynn. That name echoes in her mind, stirring doubts she can't voice yet. Later that afternoon, James invites her out. "Let's get some fresh air. I have something to show you." Diep hesitates, glancing at her worn clothes. "Do I look presentable enough?" "You look perfect," James replies, his tone gentle but firm. They walk through the bustling streets, the scent of roasted chestnuts mixing with crisp autumn air. James leads her into a small boutique and picks up a scarf. "It's getting colder. You need to stay warm." Diep shakes her head. "You don't have to buy me things." James drapes the scarf over her shoulders anyway, smiling. "It's not about things. It's about you." Her heart softens, yet the seed of doubt remains. Could James's care extend to someone else too? They end up in his cafe, a cozy place fragrant with roasted beans. Diep sips milk tea, while James busies himself with a quick call. As she watches him, her mind paints scenes of him laughing beside Lynn, whispering things that should belong only to her. The sound of approaching footsteps pulls her from her spiral. A woman stands at their table. She's poised, her smile professional. "Hello, I'm Lynn." She introduces herself politely. "James's new secretary." Diep's hand freezes on her cup, her heart skipping. So, this is the woman. Lynn glances between them, curiosity in her eyes. "Are you James's wife?" Diep lowers her gaze. "Not yet, but we're expecting a baby together." James returns just in time to catch those words, his expression softening with pride. "Yes, and I couldn't be happier," he adds, placing a reassuring hand on Diep's shoulder. Lynn's smile widens. "That's wonderful. Congratulations to you both. Diep blinks, startled. The warmth in Lynn's tone doesn't match the rival she imagined. The three of them sit together, the air thick with unspoken questions. James senses Diep's tension and decides it's time to clear the fog. Diep, he begins softly. Is something bothering you? She grips the edge of her cup, summoning courage. I thought maybe you and Lynn were more than just boss and secretary. Silence lingers for a heartbeat. Then Lynn bursts into laughter, not mocking, but light. Oh no, James is like a big brother at work. I admire him, yes, but it's purely professional. James leans forward, locking eyes with Diep. You're the only woman in my heart, no one else. Her cheeks flush with embarrassment and relief. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have doubted you. James squeezes her hand gently. Don't apologize. You've been through enough in life to make anyone cautious. But I want you to trust me completely. The cafe glows with golden light, wrapping the three of them in warmth. The misunderstanding begins to dissolve, though Diep still battles the remnants of her insecurities. That evening, back on the farm, she prepares a simple meal of grilled corn. The crackle of firewood fills the kitchen as Hockey sprawls nearby, tail thumping. James bites into the corn and grins. Delicious, as always. Diep smiles faintly, but her thoughts drift back to Lynn. Her doubts are gone, yet a lingering unease remains, an echo of her old fears that she is not enough. James notices her silence. He sets down the cob and cups her face with both hands. Listen to me, Diep. You are my family now. You and our baby. No secretary, no work. Nothing else will ever change that. Tears prick her eyes, the firelight making them shimmer. She wants to believe him fully, to release the chains of her past. For the first time in days, her heart beats with fragile hope. As night deepens, the farmhouse falls quiet. Outside, the fields sway under the moon, and inside, James and Diep sit together by the fire. The silence between them is no longer heavy, but comforting, a new beginning carved from honesty. Yet beneath that comfort lies a question Diep can't shake. Even if James is true, can she ever silence the insecurities that haunt her? The answer waits in the days ahead, where trust will be tested not by strangers, but by the ghosts of her own heart. The following morning dawns with a soft drizzle, mist rolling over the farmland like a delicate veil. Lytudiep stands at the porch, one hand resting on her rounded belly as she watches the raindrops trickle down the leaves. The memory of the previous evening still lingers, her heart torn between relief and shame. She had accused James silently in her mind, doubting his loyalty, only to learn how misplaced her fears had been. Inside, James is already up, papers spread out on the table. He glances at her through the open door, his voice steady. You shouldn't stand too long in this damp air. Come in, you'll catch a chill. Diep steps in, smiling faintly. You sound more like a doctor than my husband-to-be. I'll play every role I need to, James replies with a grin, as long as it keeps you safe. Her heart warms, but her mind whispers back, isn't it selfish to keep demanding his reassurances? That afternoon, James suggests they meet Lynn again, this time for a proper meal. Better to clear the air fully, he says. Diep hesitates, but agrees. She knows running from her doubts won't erase them. The three gather at a quiet restaurant tucked away on a narrow street. The atmosphere is cozy, the smell of simmering broth welcoming them inside. James orders a spread of dishes, making sure Diep's favorites are included. As they wait, Lynn looks directly at Diep, her expression earnest. I know yesterday must have been uncomfortable for you. I want to make it clear. I respect James deeply, but only as my boss. He treats all his employees with kindness, not just me. Diep feels heat rising to her cheeks. I misunderstood. I was afraid. Lynn reaches across the table, gently touching her hand. You're carrying his child. That's something sacred. Believe me, James talks about you often, about how strong you are, how grateful he feels to have you. James nods, his voice low but firm. Every word is true. Diep, I want you to stop doubting yourself. You're the heart of my life. The sincerity in his tone softens her completely. Tears threaten to fall, but she blinks them back. For the first time, she sees Lynn not as a rival, but as a witness to James's faithfulness. Dinner passes in laughter and gentle conversation. Lynn shares amusing stories from the office, even confessing how clumsy she was on her first day. James teases her lightly, but his gaze always drifts back to Diep, his devotion written in every glance. Walking back home later, the rain has stopped, leaving the air fresh and cool. The cobblestone streets glisten under the lamplight. James slips his hand into Diep's, his grip firm and steady. Feel better now? She nods, smiling through tears. I do. Thank you for being patient with me. You never have to thank me for that, he says gently. Patience is easy when it's with the person you love. That night, as they sit by the oil lamp in their small living room, Diep finally opens her heart. James, I've carried so many scars from my past. Sometimes, I'm afraid of losing what I love, so I try to protect myself before it can happen. That's why I doubted you. James listens quietly, then pulls her close. You don't have to protect yourself from me. My promise is to protect you and our child. Trust isn't built in a day, but every day I'll prove I'm worthy of it. The flame flickers, casting soft light on their entwined hands. Diep feels the weight lifting piece by piece. Days pass, and with them, small but meaningful changes. James makes an effort to include Diep in his world. He brings her to the cafe more often, introducing her to staff, making her part of conversations instead of leaving her in the shadows. Lynn greets her warmly each time, the unease between them gone. On the farm, James helps her water the vegetables, even though his city upbringing makes him clumsy with the tools. Diep laughs at his crooked rows, and the sound carries through the fields like a healing balm. In those moments, her old fears feel distant. One evening, as twilight paints the sky in hues of violet and rose, James brings out a small box. Inside lies a simple silver ring. Diep gasps softly. James. He kneels, not with grandeur, but with sincerity. I wanted to wait until the perfect time, but I've realized the perfect time is whenever I can look at you and say this: I want to marry you. Not just because you're carrying our child, not just because it feels right, but because you are the love of my life. Her eyes well with tears. She remembers every doubt, every moment of insecurity, and realizes how far they've come. Yes, she whispers, voice trembling. Yes, James. He slips the ring onto her finger, then rises to kiss her forehead gently. From today, no more shadows between us. The crickets sing in the nearby fields, the air cool and tender. Hockey barks happily, as if sharing their joy. The farmhouse glows softly, no longer just a place of shelter, but a home filled with hope. Later that night, as Diep lies in bed with James beside her, she feels the baby stir faintly within her. She places James's hand on her belly, and his eyes widen with wonder. Our little one is reminding us he's here too, Diep says softly, a smile curving her lips. James presses his forehead to hers, and he'll grow up knowing his parents' love is unshakable. For the first time in a long while, Diep drifts into sleep without fear. Her doubts have loosened their grip, replaced by something sturdier, trust. The storms of misunderstanding have passed, leaving behind a clearer sky. And under that sky, James and Diep begin to build not just a family, but a life anchored in honesty, patience, and love, strong enough to withstand any shadow.